Amen. Do take a seat. We live, don't we, by priorities. Whether those priorities are good ones or bad ones. You know, we live by the values we choose, right? It's amazing, isn't it? How much time and money you can spend on the stuff you prioritize. You know, if you're seeing a new series on Netflix, you think I should really be going to bed now, but I just watch another one. And sometimes you think, wow, I'm not sure if I can afford that holiday, but if I bung it on the credit card, I can take the holiday and then pay it off over the next 12 months. You know, suddenly all those things we tell ourselves about not going into debt and stuff like that, it doesn't matter because you've made it a priority and you'll do whatever it takes. And God says, live your life by the right priorities. Can we get commandment number 1 on the screen? Exodus 20, verses 1 to 3. There's a reason why God puts this first. Because if it's not first, we live by another value. And God says, look, I want this one at the very top of your life, you know, because it governs how you live your life. The top priority for your life is the way governs the way you live your life, right? If it's not there, you'll organize your life according to other values. I want to say this aloud. It says, God spoke all these words, saying, you want to move it on, or shall I read it in my own? How quick are you on the draw? There we go. Great. I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. God says, you shall have no other gods before me. You know, God doesn't apply for his own job, does he? He is the most important thing in the universe. And we can choose whether or not to prioritize him, but that's who he is. You know, right at the beginning, God says to us, before all the other commandments are there, he says, right at the beginning, make me a priority within your life. There's once a woman, and she was lonely, and she thought, I know, I'm going to buy a talking parrot. So she goes along to the pet shop, and she buys a very talkative parrot. Pet shop owner said, he's very talkative. He'll definitely keep you company. Brings the parrot home. Parrot says absolutely nothing at all. Nothing. Can't get a single word out of the parrot whatsoever. So this is a bit weird. Woman gives it a couple of days, pops back to the pet shop. He said, look, this parrot, you said, was very communicative. He didn't say anything. Pet shop owner scratches his head and thinks, well, you know, he likes looking at his reflection in the mirror. Why don't you buy a mirror for him? He likes looking at that. So anyway, buys a mirror, takes it home, puts it in the cage. And the parrot looks at his own reflection in the mirror, still doesn't say anything whatsoever. Anyway, she goes back to the pet shop. It still hasn't worked. What else have you got? He said, well, he likes climbing a ladder to walk up the ladder, look into the mirror, look at his own reflection. Fair enough, she says. Buys a ladder for 50p, puts it in the cage, and the parrot goes up the ladder all the way up the top, looks at his reflection in the mirror, still says absolutely nothing. So this is a bit weird. Goes back to the pet shop. Says the pet shop owner, he's still not saying anything. So that's very weird. Anyway, well, look, try one last thing. I will sell you a little swing. Because, you know, birds, they like swings, and goes up the top, swing, swing, swing on the swing. So anyway, goes back, puts it in the cage. Parrot goes up the top of the ladder, looks at his reflection in the mirror, gets on the swing, swings, doesn't say anything at all. Next morning, the woman gets up, the parrot is dead. Parrot is dead. End of story. That's the end of it. She thinks, well, that's very weird. I wonder what happened. I don't know what went on there. She goes back to the pet shop owner. She just feels, you know, it's only been a few days to get back to the pet shop owner, just to say, you know, things didn't work out right. And the pet shop owner said, well, did he say anything at all? I mean, did he say anything just before he died? And she said, well, he did say one thing. Have you got any food? Have you got any food? She thought, That's what I didn't do. And sometimes we forget, don't we, we forget that the main thing is to keep the main thing, the priority. And we think, well, what on earth is wrong here? Something's gone awry. But God says, look, I just want you to keep on doing the main thing in your life. And the main thing is to put God first. Can we say together, we forget that the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And God says, you shall have no other gods before me, because the relationship you have with me affects every other relationship you've got within your life. God is the creator of the universe, but he longs for a personal relationship with you and me. Some of us, when we drive to church, we made it a priority to get to church today, didn't we? All the NFL traffic, if it wasn't a priority, we wouldn't have bothered. We sat at home now. But we prioritize getting here. But sometimes, we can bring Jesus with us in the car, and it's like we put him in the boot. And Jesus is brought along the North Circular all the way to the LTC. We park up. Jesus is in the boot. We say, right, Jesus, you can get out for the religious happy hour for an hour. I'll take you into the LTC and, I'll praise you for an hour and we'll stick you back in the boot, drive you back home again. Nobody would be any the wiser for the rest of the week, And there's others of us. We have maybe Jesus. He's sat on the back seat. And he's there, and he's a companion, but he's just a passenger, right? He's just along for the drive. So we're happy to have Jesus there as a presence, but not as our all-important Lord and Savior. We might have him on the front seat, right? The passenger seat right there, and think, well, look, he's in a pretty privileged position. Now, I know you think you know where I'm going with this. You think, has anybody got Jesus in the driving seat? And you think, that's me. I've got it. He's driving my life. He's in charge of the steering wheel, the gear, the direction. If you're driving the car, the driver's in charge, right? That's why all men want to do it. They want to be the people who are set the journey, set the destination. I'm driving at my speed. I've got the aircon on at the right level. And we might like to think we've got Jesus in the driving seat. But have you ever heard of a backseat driver? When Jesus is taking a turn to the left, marked generosity, you're piping up from the back saying, hang on, Jesus, are you sure you want to turn left? I'm not sure that's the right direction at all. Jesus is thinking, right, third exit at the roundabout, turn right, forgiveness. And you're piping up at the back, Jesus, you don't know my work colleague. You don't know what my mum's like. I'm not sure we want to take this turn. Forget it. I want to go second exit at the roundabout. Before you know it, he's got loads of chatter at the back. Who really is driving our life? Who really is in charge? And if Jesus is in the car of your life, is he allowed to get on and do the driving? And are we happy to go along the journey? Having made him number one, we constantly need to reaffirm Jesus' place within our life, right? Now, I can't just say I married my wife 10 years ago, ergo, you're valued. If I just traded on that for every day of the rest of my marriage, I would not get very far. It didn't say, well, it just boiled down to a commitment I made in 2008. I constantly need to reaffirm it. I often fail, but that's the idea, isn't it? We don't just, look at the date in the diary and say, well, love, that was good enough, wasn't it? We had a lovely time then. Do you remember a decade ago and we partied and we had lovely food and we had the church ceremony? That's good enough. But what's good enough for then is not good enough to carry us all the way through, is it? How do we put God first? First gives us a clue, because first, last time I checked, has 5 letters in it. F-I-R-S-T. And I want to set ourselves a series of 5 statements that help us prioritize Jesus within our life. And I believe, number one, not the only thing by any means, I don't mean that, but it begins with an F, so it's helpful. We say we put God first in our finances. In our finances. Can we say that together? Put him first in our finances. You can tell a lot about somebody, can't you? In fact, you can tell almost everything about somebody with where they put their cash. You know, they may say one thing, but if you open up their checkbook or their bank statement, you'll find out where their heart really is, because that's the stuff they pay for and that's the stuff they value. You know, I have to teach my son Victor about materialism. You know, I have to say to him, look, you must share your toys. You've got lots of toys. When Joshua comes up and wants to play with his Mini Cooper, you can release that to him. But it's amazing how even early on, even he's just 2 years old, that hold of materialism is so strong, isn't it? You know, you have to remind him that it's not the first thing in your life. You can share your toys and you will get more of them. You don't have to hoard them all. And you go to Deuteronomy 8, 11 to 18. And it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes we give more to God when we have nothing, right? I remember as a student one time, you know, I gave like loads of cash to the Lord. And looking back, I don't actually think God was telling me specifically to give that amount of money. You know, have you ever done that sometimes? You know, you gave it, but God didn't necessarily say it. You know, and I thought I was going to get 100-fold return on my £200. So every day I was waking up in the morning, I had no money whatsoever. I used to go down to the letterbox thinking any minute now I'm going to get a check for 10 grand in there, and I open it, and you know what, there was nothing there. There wasn't anything there at all. And, you know, I had really no money and started to live on, you know, those Tesco Value baked beans and the Tesco Value pasta. And I like baked beans and I like pasta, but not every day for every meal, because I've run out of everything in my cupboard. And I thought, this is embarrassing now. You know, God, did I get it wrong? And God spoke to me so clearly. He said, it's the clearest time God has ever spoken to me. He didn't do it by by an audible voice, but you know, I heard it so clearly, and it's not something I would have said myself, so I knew that it was him. He said, you will not be put to shame for your giving. You will not be put to shame for your giving. And you can't outgive God. You can't commit an error in the area of generosity. It just can't happen. And you know, God needed to remind the children of Israel. Sometimes, you know, when we get a bit of money and we get all our stuff together and we get our lovely house and a beautiful car and all the rest of it, we don't want to let our hands, we don't want to release our grip on our own stuff, do we? We don't want to release it back to God. We think, well, God, you know, I've spent 20 years getting here. I'm not paying the sacrifices I did in the past. You know, it's easy to do when you haven't got much, but when you've got a little bit more, then you think, oh, God, I'm hanging on to all this stuff. Thank you very much. Let's read a little bit. So Deuteronomy 11 to 18, if that's okay. And I'll just read a little bit. This is God's instruction to his people not to drift, not to make material things more important than anything else. And they'd begun to prosper a little bit. And God said, look, you know, don't forget the source of prosperity. That matters more than anything else. Deuteronomy 8:11, it says this, beware that you don't forget the Lord your God, by not keeping his commandments, his judgments and his statutes, which I command you today, lest when you've eaten and are full and have built beautiful houses and dwell in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and gold are multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, when your heart's lifted up and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led you through that great and terrible wilderness, in which there were fiery serpents and scorpions, thirsty land where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and he might test you, to do you good in the end. Then you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gained me this wealth. And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it's he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. God says, put him first in our finances. Number 2, put God first in our interests. You know, it's funny, you can be a football fan and everybody thinks that's perfectly normal, but if you're a God fan, people call you a fanatic. Oh, you're a religious fan, or a bit of a God botherer, something like that. But you can jump up and down at Arsenal Stadium and nobody bats an eyelid, you know? To what extent is God first in our interests? You know, what do we read? What do we think? What do we talk about? Do we do everything to the glory of God? Do we do everything in our lives to the glory of God? So is God really there, not just on a Sunday, but in the stuff we really dwell on, the stuff we read, the stuff we watch, stuff we talk about, the stuff we confess? Put God first in your interests. Thirdly, put God first in your relationships. And we say that together. Put God first in your relationships, right? If Jesus is first in my wife's life and my life, Jesus isn't going to fight Jesus, is he? You know, we're pulling in the same direction with Jesus at the head. You know, relationships matter. Relationships matter, don't they? Can we go to Daniel 3? Verse 8. And this is interesting, because I think sometimes God says, I really want to honor you, but first you need to honor me. And I think, you know, God sometimes has that as a reward for us, but God was saying, look, I just want you to put me first in that thing. And in this, we have Daniel's friends who had to disobey the king. And it wasn't an easy test. Daniel 3 verse 8, it said, therefore at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everybody who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyra and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews who you set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's quite a mouthful, isn't it, with those three? But this was a test for them. They've been loyal to the king, but would they be loyal to their God? And they had to answer, Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that's the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you that we don't serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. So the fire is stoked up, isn't it? And you know what happened? Did they burn to a crisp? Were they sacrificed there and then? No. Verse 25, it said, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. That was pretty gutsy, wasn't it? A pretty ballsy thing to do. Sometimes God calls us to put him first in a particular situation. They could have compromised. They decided not to. Sometimes God says to us, I want to honor you, but you need to honor me. Put God first in your relationships. The other thing, FIRS. Put God first in your schedule. In your schedule. Not just on a Sunday morning, but how we spend our time, what we read on. We spend more time on Facebook than reading the Bible. Arguably, sometimes I do. You know, where do we invest our schedule? What is our timekeeping when it comes to the things of the Lord? And finally, we put God first in our troubles. Put God first in our troubles. You know, we don't know what troubles come our way. We know they're only temporary. We know that God has the final victory. But we know we go through difficult times. I would say this has been one of the very, very toughest years of my life. But I choose to put God first, knowing he will bring me and others out of it. Sometimes it's only when we know that we have nothing left that we realize God is enough. It's only when we have nothing left that we realize God has enough. You know, does Jesus take first place in your life? If Jesus turned up to your home this afternoon, what would you do? If Jesus turned up at your house to spend a day or two, if he came unexpectedly, I wonder what you'd do. I know you'd give him the nicest room for such an honored guest, and all the food you'd serve to him would be the very best. You'd keep on reassuring him you were glad to have him there, that serving him in your own home is joy beyond compare. But when you saw him coming, would your welcome be sincere? Or deep down, would you worry that this man had come too near? Would you have a change of clothes before you let him in, and hide some magazines and put a Bible where they'd been? Would you turn off the video and hope he hadn't seen the picture that was showing on the TV screen? Would you hide your world of music, tuck your CDs out of sight? Would you rush about and tidy other things that were not right? I wonder if the Saviour spent a day or two with you, would you choose to keep on doing all the things you often do? Would you choose to keep on saying all those things you often say? Would life for you continue as it does from day to day? Would your family conversation lull or keep its usual pace? And would you find it hard each meal to remember to say grace? Would you sing the songs you always sing and read the books you read and let him know the things on which your mind and spirit feed? Would you take Jesus with you everywhere you plan to go? Or would you maybe change your plans for a day or so? Would you be glad to have him meet your very closest friends? Or would you hope they'd stay away until his visit ends? Would you be glad to have him stay forever, on and on and on? Or would you sigh with great relief, when at last he was gone? It might be interesting to know the things you do if Jesus came in person and spent some time with you and with me. You know, do we put God first within our lives? You know, does Jesus have first place? There are three categories of people, aren't there? There are people for whom Jesus means nothing, right? He died for them, but they're unaware of it. He doesn't mean anything. There's another category of people for whom Jesus means something. But we want to be the third category, don't we? The people for whom Jesus means everything. Jesus means everything. You know, if we have no other gods, we can have God in our life. And God said, look, I want to transform you. I want to move within your life. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to honor you. We need to put him first in all things, in our finances, in our interests, in our relationships, in our schedule, in our troubles. In the name of Jesus. Amen and amen.